Gemma. As said at the start, I am continuing to be inspired by listening to running coaches. So, things to know about me: I'm a physio with over 18 years experience, but specifically the reason that I work with someone who's a running coach is that they've got loads of knowledge. This is what they do this every day. So where does the physio come in? So the physio comes in about prevention, or we should be. I know not everyone does this, but one of my passions as a physio, and the way that the whole Physio Academy works, is if you have an injury, I want you to get better. But I also really don't want to see you again for a very, very, very long time. So everything that I'm doing is about giving you knowledge and giving you those things that I've gone and done masters and courses and had workshops to learn, so that you have that in your head. And if you're not sure, then you can come to me with all my knowledge as a physio, or anyone else that you have locally if you're watching this from different areas. So if we come into running and injury prevention and all of those multifactorial things, how you run, listening to the running coach, how you pace yourself, the kit, the equipment is really important. But there are other variables or other factors that can make you more or less successful. I will probably talk about this in lots of my sessions, so if you keep joining me, you'll get to know a little bit of what I'm going to say. But the ability for your cardiovascular health, that is your lung and heart and kind of ability to tolerate, actually can increase quicker than the ability of your muscles and your joints and your tendons to adapt to those forces. And I'm really visual, and I love a bit of a pyramid and a triangle. And what we're always trying to do at any stage of running, but specifically new runners, is match that cardiovascular health, that going out, that couch to 5K, with how we're looking after our body. And the biggest injuries that I see here as a physio is that person who is sitting at home, who is suddenly, light bulb moment, I really want to get fit. And what's really easy to do is to go out and run, but they have done no preparation before they go out and do this. There are those people that break the rules, break the molds. They can go out and they can do loads of stuff straight off the bat. We all know those individuals who can just do that, but most people that I see, that is a different story. And part of that side of the triangle is your fitness and your running and your run coach and your training. And the other side of that triangle is all this stuff that kind of fits underneath, which is body preparation and what you're doing. And one of those factors is stretching. Things like strengthening are incredibly important, and come in for the next sessions over the next couple of weeks about that. Stretching is something that I remember doing from the youngest age in PE. I'd be standing there trying to hold onto my ear, trying to balance and stretch out what they call this muscle, which is your quad. And it's kind of followed us all the way through exercise. And it is quite a confusing topic when you start looking into the research around stretching. What you first of all notice is that we call them studies. Loads of people have done lots of research. And when you have these uber intelligent people who compare all of the research, they then go, well, some of these studies aren't great quality. But one of the things that they definitely know at the moment is that in terms of injury prevention, so reducing your risk of injury, typically what they thought just going to do a stretch, the evidence isn't clear that it helps reduce injury. It doesn't mean that it's not important, and we'll come on to why it is important, but that typical traditional view of loads of stretching before you do your sport and loads of stretching afterwards doesn't necessarily reduce the risk of injury, and nor does it reduce the amount of delayed onset muscle soreness, or known as DOMS, which is that feeling of soreness 1 to 2 days after your activity, be it even in the gym. Foam roller, so go back and watch the video, it's already uploaded onto Facebook and YouTube. The foam roller does have a bit more evidence to look at DOMS, and it's a really good session to watch to complement what we're going to go through with stretching. So we can divide stretching into acute stretching and chronic stretching. Acute stretching means short stretches, and chronic stretching means a stretch that is held for a longer period of time, but also done over a much longer period of time. So it could be 30 to 60 seconds done for 8 to 12 weeks, where acute stretching could be 10 to 20 seconds done once before you actually do an event. Let's talk about stretching before you do any form of exercise and specific running. So the research has shown that there is some evidence to suggest that if you do lots of static stretching, which means holding it for a long period of time before you go out and run, there is a chance that your muscles, the capability of your muscles to fire, are not as efficient. Now, there's a lot of scientific, what we call physiology behind this, and I'm not going to go through that today. There's lots that you can read about, but the evidence says that lots of long stretching before may increase the chance of injury just because your muscles aren't firing as well. When they've looked at acute stretches, so like a 5 to 10 second stretch, there doesn't seem to be too much of a link with the muscle. So if you feel that you want to do a little bit of a kind of simple movements before you start, that's okay. That's when the foam roller comes in as well. That's when generally moving your joints and loosening up your body can also be really effective. After you've done your sport, there again is no evidence to say that going into your massive stretch routine after reduces the risk of delayed onset muscle soreness or injury. But we then get into how it feels. So there are a couple of reasons that stretching can help you long term. The first is psychology, and how we feel in our body is really, really, really important. So if you're one of those people that after the end of your session enjoys doing a nice stretch, there isn't any harm by doing that. So there's no reason to stop the stretch afterwards. If it helps you, if you are one of those people where it does feel better for you, then that's great, and please carry on. When you are looking at a piece of research, they're looking at what they call the significant difference. So if you had 20 people do a stretch, you want the majority of them to have had some benefit. And if the majority of them don't, they're going to say, well, actually, maybe you don't need to do it. But there are always going to be those people who go, well, I know the majority didn't find that work, but actually for me, I honestly find it really helpful. So after stretching, if you are one of those people, after running, if you are one of those people, please carry on and do your stretching. It's really important. I do love that feel of a stretch. It really helps me. Psychologically, it's also my time for me to kind of get back into my body. The second main important reason why chronic stretching, so that's long-term stretching, can be beneficial is because of the link with flexibility. This is again quite a large topic, so let's break it down quite simply. Just because you're flexible, just because you can touch your hands to the floor, I cannot do this, doesn't mean you're more or less at risk of being injured. So if you think, oh my gosh, I've looked at that person in yoga and I've looked at my mate next to me and they can effectively do the splits, or their hamstrings are really bendy, I can't do that, I'm going to get injured more. Relax, that isn't the case. So your degree of flexibility does not link with your increased incidence of injury. It is sport specific. So yes, a gymnast needs to have different degrees of flexibility, but for a runner, there isn't this clear link that being able to pop your hands flat on the floor or not being able to go too far really increases your incidence of injury. For running, the main thing that we need to have is we need to have quite good flexibility in our ankles, nice movement in our knees, nice movement in our hips so that we can get our leg back as we're running, some nice movement in our upper back so that our body moves as a system. And this is when stretching for that degree of normal flexibility is really important. If we look at the people that we treat when I do my run clinic and we look at injury prevention, there is a link between people who can't achieve the normal movement for running and the likelihood of them developing an injury. That doesn't mean above normal, hyper flexible, but your normal range of movement. Again, there are always those people that will seem a little bit stiffer, a little bit less flexible, who won't have an injury. It isn't, you know, one set prescription fits all, but are the key things that we want to do. So if you're stretching, what you're looking at is being able to stretch for a long period of time, 8 to 12 weeks, to gradually increase your normal movement so that you can achieve the movement that you need to have for running. And that is how we look at stretching and we look at flexibility. Stretching post-injury is very different. There is lots of medical reasons why we do that and how it comes in and why we would need to stretch after an injury. And that's kind of something that we would work through individually if someone has come to see me with a hamstring strain or a calf strain. So flexibility for normal movement, let's go for it. So what are you looking at doing? You're looking at doing a stretch session about 3 times a week. They say the American College of Sports Medicine talk about 10 to 30 seconds done once or twice in a set, 3 times a week. I normally tell people to stretch for 30 to 60 seconds because in a rush, we're going to count really, really quickly. And clinically, it seems to be something that most people can get a handle on. So we're going to focus on a couple of movements that are really good for runners specifically, and we're going to look at more lower body stretches today, even though upper body is really important as well to make sure we get that flexibility. So let's start off with our hips. So this is our front of our thighs, this is our hips, and this area here where I'm touching is what we call our hip flexor muscles. Some of you may have heard of them. And if this can be tight, it can make us bend forwards a little bit more. It can stop our ability to actually get our leg back, which is really important as part of running. So how to stretch? There are a couple of different levels for this. So the first level is the kneeling hip flexor stretch. I'm not going to hold for 60 seconds. This would be a very boring teach. You would all be kind of standing here for a while or sitting. So I kneel down, 1 foot flat. Doesn't really matter about the back toe, and you can see I'm holding on. If you've got good balance, you don't need to, but if you don't have to be wobbling all over the place. So foot, knee in line. Think about your pelvis. We talk about trying not to overly arch our back as we do this. Tucking my bottom under gently. Degree of stretching. We all have different sensitivity as we stretch. 0 is no feeling. 10 out of 10 is tears, screaming, this is awful. You want a gentle, comfortable feeling, 2 or 3 out of 10. So all you've got to do is just hold this position, count, and if you're not feeling a stretch, then you can gently bring this foot forwards, gently lunge forwards a little bit more, till you get that stretch that's 2 or 3 out of 10. Like everything, there are many variations on this, what you do with your arm, what you do with your foot, but very simply, this is a very simple hip flexor stretch. I don't believe in feeling effort when you stretch. You want to be nice and relaxed. So then the next progression is to come up a little bit, and you can come up here, a little bit more challenging. Sometimes it feels like a stronger stretch. But again, you do not need to do this if kneeling down is comfortable. One of the important things is to maybe carry over that hip flexor stretch into something dynamic, something that's functional. So you could then come up and think, well, how can I use that? Well, actually, can I just practice just taking my leg back, trying to keep my upper body still, and I'm using that length that I've gained. Higher level, and this kind of can fit into your strength and conditioning, is you could come back, which is a stretch on this hip flexor, and you could do some dynamic lunges. Yes, it's strengthening, but if you just did 3 or 4, you're kind of actively using that length of muscle. They're progressions. So that's your hip flexors. Quadriceps at the front of your thigh. Again, loads of different ways you can do this, from lying on the floor, from lying on your side. The biggest thing about quadriceps is to hold on if you need. So you would hold on to something, maybe your bed, or I could hold on to the side here. I bring my heel to my bottom and I'm just going to hop around so that you can see. Biggest thing that goes wrong is people kind of arch everywhere. You want to be tucked under. Again, you're going to feel a stretch at the front of your thigh, holding for 30 to 60 seconds. If you struggle to reach your foot, you can use a belt, you can use a towel to try and do that. I think that's quite an easy functional way. You can do it in lying, but if you're kind of up and about, it tends to be a bit easier. We're going to go on to our calf muscle now. So there are two different aspects to your calf muscle. You've got your gastrocnemius, which is your kind of longer muscle. You've got your soleus, which is your shorter muscle. So your gastrocnemius, things that people commonly don't do when they do this, they tend to have their back knee bent and their heel up. You're not going to be able to stretch that muscle that way. So the heel goes down, your knee is straight, looking forwards. If this is tight, if you're feeling an excruciating pull at the back of your calf, which is here, please bring your foot forwards. If it's quite easy, you can do this and just take it further back. To change it to that shorter muscle, you can bend your knee. And this is your soleus. It also helps some of the flexibility in what we call our Achilles tendon. So you can just hold that again, 30 to 60 seconds. There's lots of dynamic ways to carry over kind of that foot and ankle flexibility. One of the things, I'm not sure if you can see, but you can pulling over a little step here. So you can go onto a bottom step. I know it seems really obvious. I have had patients do this on top steps. Bottom step, holding on, going up and down. Up and down, and this is kind of a dynamic type of stretch. Up and down. And you can also bend your knees, going up and down. Up and down. One thing to notice about kind of calf flexibility, genetically, some people are born with more or less flexibility around what we call our Achilles tendons at the back. So one of the ways that you can see this, if I crouch down, my heels can stay pretty flat on the floor. For a lot of people, as they crouch, they have to bring their heels up. And that just tells us their natural degree of flexibility. How does that affect you as you stretch? So if you look at me side on, I can easily bend my knees and keep my heels down, and I can do that to quite a low level. If you try this at home and as soon as you bend your knees, your heels want to come up, please don't fight against yourself. You can generally work on your mobility, but that is partly how you've been born, just your natural genetics. A lovely stretch that everyone can do. This is what we call Pilates foot series. It's a bit of a mobility exercise. So you come up onto your tiptoes, you bend your knees, you try and keep your knees bent as you lower your heels and you stand up. So if I do that side on, come up onto your tiptoes, bend the knees, keeping my knees bent, lower my heels, come back up. It's an amazing warm-up exercise for flexibility around the ankles. But remember, if you know that you don't have as much flexibility, be kind to yourself. Don't kind of rage against yourself. So you may find that you come up onto your tiptoes, you can only bend the knees the tiniest amount. And that's great for you, and then you can come up. It's about maximising your own degree of flexibility. As I said at the start, it does not matter if you're not as flexible as the person next to you. You want to gain your normal amount of flexibility for your sport. So we've done our hip flexors. We've kind of looked a little bit at the calf, the static stretching, the dynamic stretches on the step, or that foot series. We've looked at our quads, just holding that. The kind of dynamic movements for that are a little bit harder. They're kind of Bulgarian split squats, which is another session which won't scare you off by doing them straight away. And then we've got our good old-fashioned hamstrings. So it's really lovely to think about the hamstrings. It's a really great way to start seeing how our body's connected. The myth that there always is, which is if I stretch and stretch and stretch, I'm going to make my muscles grow longer. They've done loads of research. I don't want to go into how they've managed to do that. They've done loads of research, and they've actually shown that at the moment, for static stretching, we're not actually kind of generally lengthening the muscle as we thought we were. What they think is happening is our tolerance to the stretch and our stretch kind of not quite reflex, but our ability to feel tension under a stretch changes. And that links in with our neural system, our nervous system, and how our body responds. So think about it like we get a little bit more less sensitive, so we can achieve our movement better, so that we can have better function. So when we go into a hamstring stretch, a lot of us are not only stretching our muscle, we're actually stretching what we call our neural fascial system, which is our whole body's connective tissue. And this is really, really important. So I'm actually going to show a hamstring stretch in lying. It just gives me a little bit better control. So if I have a lie down on my back, I'm going to, one leg straight or bent, it doesn't matter. I'm going to hold behind the back of my thigh and I'm going to straighten. And just doing this, keeping my foot relatively relaxed, I'm mostly going to be stretching my hamstring. If I want to change that and increase the stretch to another area, I can do things like pointing and flexing my foot. I can think about bringing it in and out. And what this does is it actually loosens up or mobilizes this neural fascial system. And this neural fascial system is the connective tissue that connects my little toe to the top of my head. It's full of nerves and fascia, which we talked about with the foam roller session, and making sure that we are mobile in our whole of our connective tissues, not just our muscles, but the fascia and the nerves, is really also important for function. So you can stretch hamstrings in lots of other ways. I see people, I'm not flexible enough to do this, I'm not going to injure myself on camera. You know, they lift their leg up and they put it on something. I can do it on here, I can do it on here. You know, this kind of stretch. This isn't just my hamstring, especially as I bend forwards, because my hamstring stops here. That's my neural fascial system. You see people doing this as well. So with my foot flat, you see it a lot in yoga. The lower I go, the more I pull my foot up, my hamstrings stop there. So as I'm doing this, I'm getting my calf, I'm getting my glutes, I'm getting that whole neural fascial system. So just to go back again, hip flexors, calf muscles, quads, really important to keep your normal degree of flexibility. You can add in any other type of mobility stretching exercise that you want to maximize your flexibility. This is just a very limited teach, and then we can deal with people individually when we look at them during the run assessment to see what else that they may need to improve their movement. So I hope you found that helpful. So we're thinking acute stretching, short stretches, pre-running are okay, but they're looking at the foam roller more. For your warm-up, just loosening off your body. If you want to change your range of movement, the amount of flexibility you have so that you can continue it with function, you need a stretch program for 8 to 12 weeks, 3 times a week, up to 30 to 60 seconds. If you do enjoy stretching more, it's absolutely fine to do so, but do that after your exercise. So I'm going to hand back to Gemma just to see if she's got anything else to add, and then we'll finish off.
Thanks, Katie. It was useful for me, actually. I know that stretching is something that I could probably do some more of. The only thing I had to add slightly, although you touched on it, is there are different types of nervous system. I know that I'm going to be a bit scientific here, but you go into your sympathetic nervous system when you run, so you're quite, hopefully, hyped up. You might be listening to your music. you feel great, and that's something we want, and that's a benefit of running. But what you want to do is when you finish running, you want to go into your parasympathetic nervous system. So when you rest and digest, and stretching can put you back into that. It can just be the bridge or the pathway between your run and what you're going to do next, which could potentially just be relaxing. This is particularly relevant if you run, we probably don't do it at the moment, but are running later in the day. You want to try and move back into that parasympathetic nervous system so that you can calm down and be relaxed. Otherwise you stay kind of hyped up all the time, and it may feel good at the time, but you need both to be able to do that, and stretching can move you into that.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's why things like yoga and other forms of stretching are really beautiful. It's why I stretch out at the end of my sessions, because I love the feeling it brings me back down into my body. I think some of these researchers, when they were looking at the army recruits, there's a lot of army recruits out there, and they unfortunately weren't necessarily looking at that factor, but it's a really, really, really important thing. So we're going to finish off now and just say thank you very much for joining me. Thank you, Gemma, again. I'm Katy Neale from Borehamwood Physio. Feel free to sign up and join us for the rest of the sessions. Feel free to share this with people. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the page. Feel free to comment below, and the same on Facebook as well. It's really useful. We can give you more content. We can see where you want to go in that direction. So bye for now, but